give you some MPs that he suggests that you will take down?
In the first series of The Lobby, Al Jazeera's investigative unit exposed the role of pro-Israel operatives in Britain.
The headlines at 11 o'clock.
Israel's ambassador to the UK has apologised after a senior diplomat was caught on camera saying he wanted to take down the Foreign Office Minister, Sir Alan Duncan.
Sir Alan Duncan, who's a strong critic of Jewish settlements.
An undercover reporter for Al Jazeera doing an investigation into Britain's relationship with Israel.
This investigation exposes a covert Israeli campaign to influence British policy.
The investigation led to the resignation of Shai Massot, a senior political officer at the Israeli embassy.
Mr. Massot is also heard describing the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson as an idiot.
The diplomat in question no longer seems to be a functionary of the embassy in London. And so whatever he may exactly have been doing here, his cover can be said to have been well and truly blown.
At the same time, Al Jazeera had been running a second undercover operation. Some of our reporters' covert filming was included in the first series of The Lobby. His identity became known. Tony had spent 5 months inside the pro-Israel lobby in the United States. He'd impressed colleagues with his understanding of the Middle East.
You have the resourcefulness and the depth, to sort of think strategically about this, whereas most people aren't able to do that.
A prominent Jewish online magazine described Tony as the perfect gentleman who became one of the town's best-liked Zionist activists.
You did amazing work here. The guys don't stop talking about you. They still talk about you.
Tony threw elaborate parties. And apparently anyone interested in telling a story about sinister Israeli influence in America's capital couldn't have asked for a better guest list. In the new edition of The Lobby, we investigate the role of pro-Israel advocacy groups in this country in the first of a 4-part series, how the lobby is being drawn into Israel's covert campaign to spy on American citizens. Using an undercover reporter, Al Jazeera's investigative unit infiltrates one of the most powerful lobbies in the world.
Getting $38 billion in security aid to Israel matters, which is what AIPAC is doing.
We examine how the lobby, led by AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, has secured unwavering support in Congress.
Congressmen don't do anything unless you pressure them. And the only way to do that is with money.
What the lobby is all about is to make sure that Israel gets special treatment from the United States forever.
But after occupying Palestinian lands for half a century, the pro-Israel lobby is facing a new challenge.
We called for a full boycott of Israel, divesting from it, and eventually imposing sanctions on it to achieve UN-stipulated rights of the Palestinian people.
A movement to boycott, divest, and impose sanctions on Israel, BDS, was formed on American campuses.
Seems to be achieving its goals, threatens future American support for Israel.
We believe in justice for all people. So that means the occupation has to end.
Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs responded with a covert operation to defeat BDS.
אתה צריך לעשות את זה עם הרבה מאוד עמימות. זה לא גוף צבאי היררכי שאם הרגנו את X, אז כל הגוף מתחתיו לא פועל.
So the Israeli government leverages Jewish organizations in the diaspora.
Absolutely.
It's a psychological campaign involving spying and smears.
You discredit the messenger as a way of discrediting the message.
Just stay on message. And what is that message? BDS is a hate movement.
While our reporter monitored pro-Israel groups, he was asked to go undercover for the lobby.
You're going into enemy territory. It's not for everybody.
We are a different government working on foreign soil, and we have to be very, very cautious. We have 3 different sub-campaigns which are very, very sensitive. regarding data gathering, information analysis, working on activist organization, money trail. This is something that only a country with its resources can do the best. If we want to win, we have to change our ways. We have to think differently. And this is waging a holistic campaign against the other side. Take him out of his comfort zone. Make him be on the defensive.
Israel is involved in a secretive influence campaign whose aim is to discredit its challengers in the West.
In the Air Force, when you want to win, you have to have aerial superiority. If you want to win a campaign, you must have information superiority. And this is exactly the added value Israel capabilities, technological and otherwise, we can bring to the game, and we are working on that very hard.
In the United States, the lobby is working with Israel to spy on American citizens.
We're giving them data. For example, one day, Sima's deputy sending me a photo, just a photo in WhatsApp. It's written, boycott Israel on a billboard. In a few hours, our systems and analysts could find the exact organization, people, and even their names where they live. We gave it back to the ministry. I have no idea what they did with this. But in fact, 3 days later, there were no billboards.
We use all sorts of technology. We use corporate-level, enterprise-grade social media intelligence software. Almost all of this happens on social media, so we have custom algorithms and formulae that acquire the stuff immediately.
In terms of like information sharing, we did add the Ministry of Strategic Affairs to our operations and intelligence brief, which kind of goes back to how do we get information about what's going on in American college campuses.
Generally within about 30 seconds or less of one of these things popping up on campus, whether it's a Facebook event, whether it's the right kind of mention on Twitter, the system picks it up, it goes into a queue and alerts our researchers, and they evaluate it, they tag it, and if it rises to a certain level, we issue early warning alerts to our partners.
They operate through subterfuge, and they walk a very thin line between the legal and illegal in what they do in order to gather information and to smear their opponents and just ultimately destroy them. In order to understand how the pro-Israel lobby operates, you have to literally be a fly on the wall. If you can't obtain information publicly, you should try to get into the room through other means.
Our undercover reporter, Tony, is British and Jewish and had recently graduated from the University of Oxford. He wrote articles and presented himself as a strong supporter of Israel. In Washington, he attended a course on the Israel-Palestine conflict.
I'm from the UK, and I'm just taking a course at Georgetown here over the summer.
He networked in the social circles of the pro-Israel lobby.
Hi, I'm Rona.
I'm Tony.
Nice to meet you.
Good to see you. I'm good. Good to see you. Hey.
After building his profile, Tony was accepted on a training course in pro-Israel advocacy.
Welcome to Fuel for Truth DC's second boot camp. Congratulations, everyone, to being accepted. What we're going to do right now is just kind of like introduce ourselves. I'm Daniel. After undergrad, I served in the IDF and the paratroopers for 2 years and worked at APAC for a year.
One session criticized the UN agency that provides aid for Palestinians.
Children are taught in UNRWA Palestinian schools to hate Jews.
Another lecture dealt with the international media.
Confronting media bias. During the last war, a lot of times videos are circulating of bombed areas or victims, and a lot of it's from Syria, from Iraq 10 years ago, all this stuff.
In role-play workshops, they were instructed how to respond to criticism of Israel.
Can I have a volunteer? Apartheid walls cutting off Palestine. Boycott Israel. Divest from Israel. Sanction companies that do business with Israel.
it's kind of odd to call it a wall, given that like 90% of it is a fence.
This is a photo. I see a wall.
Why can't Israel do more to help, Tony?
Our undercover reporter played the role of pro-Israel advocate.
Israel's doing a lot to help the Palestinians. I say actually Israel is doing all the best that they can, but it's a tough situation.
The businesses in Gaza can't freely send their trucks into Israel to sell their goods.
I think you'll find that that's actually a misconception. They do allow their trucks, and what they don't allow is dangerous material.
Okay, stop.
After the course, Tony was accepted as a volunteer at a pro-Israel communications group called the Israel Project.
It's Tony Kleinfeld. Kleinfeld. Like Seinfeld, but with a K.
The Israel Project, known as TIP, describes itself on its promotional videos as a strategic communications group.
At TIP, we believe we've found the answer. Israel's enemies have left the battlefield of the Middle East and are now fighting on the battlefield of public opinion.
What you have with regard to the United States and Israel is a special relationship that is unprecedented in recorded history. Not simply that the United States gives Israel a tremendous amount of economic aid and diplomatic protection, it gives that aid and protection no matter what, right? It's not conditional. And the Israel Project will go to enormous lengths to achieve that end.
During his placement as a volunteer, Tony took notes on what he saw and heard in TIP's offices. He worked in what they called the war room, where media and communications are monitored. Staff described having contacts at numerous media organizations. Their primary means of influence is by forging friendships with reporters. One employee claimed that during talks on the nuclear deal with Iran, TIP applied pressure on the Associated Press news agency to change a headline. Tony read the Israel Project's annual report, which described TIP's mission as building an echo chamber for pro-Israel information. That means using the media to amplify and repeat TIP's messages, as well as what the report describes as neutralizing undesired narratives. Tony saw one document which claimed that the echo chamber was within their grasp. Weeks before he started, Tony discussed with a senior manager how TIP deals with the media.
There are things that you do loudly. A lot of them are things you do behind the scenes. You can get a lot more done by making questions get asked by journalists. And if you create it from multiple directions at the same time through multiple journalists, then you create a kind of sense of crisis. We develop relationships, a lot about that, to get them to trust us.
The basically messages on the following: BDS is essentially a kind of a hate group targeting Israel. They're anti-peace.
We try not to even use the term just because it builds their brand. We just refer to boycotters. The goal is to actually make things happen now and to figure out what are the means of communication to do that.
In 2005, Palestinian civil rights groups sought a peaceful means to protest against Israel's occupation. They identified goods from Israel and called for their boycott. The BDS movement was born.
BDS adopted a nonviolent strategy because we think it is morally consistent and very effective against an enemy that is extremely powerful militarily. We called for boycotting Israel, divesting from it, and eventually imposing sanctions on it, as was done against apartheid South Africa, to achieve basic Palestinian rights under international law.
Free Palestine! Long live!
Over the past decade, BDS has grown around the world. By campaigning for Palestinian civil rights in land controlled by Israel, BDS believes it has exposed a deficiency in the moral defense of the Jewish state.
BDS is saying that what Israel has to do is treat the Palestinians in its midst the same way it treats Israeli Jews. The problem is that if Israel does that, there are more Palestinians, or there will be more Palestinians inside Greater Israel than there are Jews. And that means that if you had a system where everybody was treated equally and there was one person and one vote, that you would no longer have a Jewish state.
The secretive Ministry of Strategic Affairs, based in the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem, was given a mission: establish a covert campaign to defeat the BDS movement.
אנחנו אחראים על המאבק בתופעה, ובמסגרת זו יש לנו 4 רגליים: התראה, הרתעה, התקפה והסברה. אז אני אגיד לך שכשאם אתה רוצה לנצח בניהול מערכה, אתה צריך לעשות את זה עם הרבה מאוד עמימות. כמו שכשעבדתי על סוגיות צבאיות, כמו חיזבאללה, או כספי טרור, או סוריה, או כל מדינה אחרת שאיתה בעבר ניהלתי מערכה מולה כקמן. לא הלכנו ואמרנו לצד השני מה אנחנו מתכוונים לעשות. השארנו אותו בעמימות.
Government ministers attacked me in person, one of them threatening BDS leaders with targeted civil assassination, and others threatening to revoke my permanent residency, along other threats.
לא מעטים מבין מנהיגי ה-BDS מקיימים קשרים, קשרים כספיים, קשרים ארגוניים, קשרים אחרים, עם גורמים עוינים למדינת ישראל. תפקידנו, באמצעות הפעלת המודיעין, לחשוף את הקשרים האלה, ובהחלט באמצעות החשיפה הזאת, גם לדעת לפעול נגדם, לבודד אותם, גם להעביר מידע לאותם גורמים מודיעיניים בעולם וגורמים אחרים. ישראל חייבת לבצע סיכול אזרחי ממוקד במנהיגות ומול פעילי ה-BDS.
The campaign includes monitoring the activities of American students.
אנחנו עכשיו למשל נמצאים בתהליך שלם של ליצור תמונה כוללת על הקמפוסים. אם אתה רוצה לנצח תופעה, אתה צריך לדעת להיות עליה בעליונות במידע וידע.
Our investigation into the role of the Israeli state at US campuses led Tony to an employee at the embassy in Washington. She's American, and her job is to analyze BDS activity for the Israeli government.
So nobody really knows what we're doing, but mainly it's been a lot of research, monitoring BDS things and reporting it back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and making sure everyone knows what's going on. They need a lot of research done and stuff like that. When they talk about it in Knesset, usually I've contributed to what the background information is. I'm not going to campuses. It's more about connecting organizations and I guess campuses and providing resources and strategy if students need it.
Is the Israeli embassy trying to leverage faculty?
Yeah. We're working with several faculty advocacy groups that kind of train faculty, so we're helping them a little bit with funding, connections, bringing them to speak, having them speak to diplomats and people in the MFA that need this information. So I kind of want to be that resource to show students we appreciate what you're doing, we see what you're doing. Here's some information if you need anything at all. We can connect you, just kind of be that person there for you.
Julia was president of the pro-Israel group at Davis, which is part of the University of California. Davis began as a center for agricultural studies, and its students are known as Aggies.
I came to UC Davis, which had a reputation of being a really pro-Israel. Now it's the top 5 most anti-Israel schools in the U.S.
Why is that?
Because of everything that happened in the last few years. It was just particularly bad. And there's a huge Muslim population in Sacramento, which is right next to Davis.
The growing support for the BDS movement in Davis and the lobby's response to it is part of a narrative that's unfolding across America's campuses. Students for Justice in Palestine, or SJP, brought a divestment motion before the Student Senate.
I was very, very nervous. The entire room was filled. I think we had about 600 students and people from the community coming in to witness this vote.
I am here today because, quite frankly, I am ashamed. I am ashamed of my university for supporting apartheid genocide of my people in Palestine.
I ended the speech with something along the lines of being on the right side of history and for the university to end its unethical ties with these corporations who were doing brutal things to Palestinians.
We knew they were gonna win because our entire student senate was all pro-BDS and like they ran for that purpose and won for that purpose, and we've been pushed out of student government for months.
Good evening. My name is Julia Rivkin, and I'm the president of Aggies for Israel.
Students streamed the hearing online. The pro-Israel group also filmed it with another purpose in mind. Their videos would play a key part in the story that was to unfold in the days ahead.
I was waiting to see what she would say. I was waiting for a blow to come my way, and that blow sure came.
We have been ignored and disrespected year after year, but we have never been silenced. We are a beacon of peace and inclusion on a campus plagued by anti-Semitism.
The talking points were that the resolution was anti-Semitic, that it was divisive. If it's divisive in the fact that you either support human rights or you don't, then so be it.
The intolerance that spawned this resolution is the same kind of intolerance that has spawned anti-Semitic movements throughout history.
The entire thing looked very rehearsed, very, very aggressive, almost comically so.
Julia and her pro-Israel allies had already decided that they didn't want to debate.
At 4 a.m. the night before, me and my team were like, you're gonna lead the walkout. And I was like, okay. And they're like, we're gonna film it just for our own purposes. I was like, totally cool. So when everything was happening, like we went into it knowing we were going to lose. So our strategy was how to like ultimately win while losing the vote.
This is our victory. And we who are victorious need not legitimize the words spoken in this empty hearing. So if you are here tonight in opposition to this resolution, I invite you now to stand up. Really, stand up. And join me in walking out of this room.
That was a wowing moment. To have them just stand up, everyone just kind of was like, what's going on? It was very shocking. As they were leaving, it was just a very big rush of relief to not have that tension, those bad vibes in the room. And so we started cheering, actually, and it was a great moment.
If you're standing in the back, it looks like some seats have opened up.
But the passing of the BDS motion proved to be just the beginning of a bigger story. In part 2, how the lobby worked to undermine the student decision.
Those swastikas, who did them?
We don't even know.
Hi.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Our undercover reporter was meeting an employee of the Israeli embassy in Washington. She had led a pro-Israel group while at university in California.
So if you are here tonight in opposition to this resolution,
Students at Davis were about to vote in favor of a divestment motion. During the debate, the pro-Israel group staged a walkout. They uploaded videos to publicize their protest.
Our thought was to control the narratives by having this speech. Like we wanted it to cause attention. We wanted everyone to see us walking out to show that like this doesn't represent us or shit about this. So that's how we kind of formulated it. That day, all of us released like 50 op-eds in major news sources so that when people made a hashtag and like a whole thing trending, so when people opened their Facebooks, it wouldn't be them celebrating their victory, it'd be us sharing our stories. Once it blew up, then random people, like the Huffington Post contacted me and was like, do you have anything to say? And I was like, conveniently, I wrote an op-ed 2 weeks ago just in case. People who weren't involved in anything, like their entire newsfeed was Israel stuff, and like that was what we wanted, because that's how we got the word out there.
How do you delegitimize the other side?
Delegitimizing them. Kind of through that lens of taking over and like making them sound crazy at their game. The student senator who's Muslim made a Facebook status saying like Israel will fall, like Sharia law is taking over Davis, like we want Hamas, like that kind of status. So that happened.
We had been called terrorists and told that we were Hamas sympathizers, that we want to bring Sharia law to campus and things like that.
Hi everyone, my name is Azka Fayaz. I'm a second-year political science major.
Azka Fayaz was a committed BDS activist and claims that pro-Israel students repeatedly tried to link her to political violence.
They just came up to me and said, "You're a terrorist. Are you a terrorist? You're gonna bring, terrorism to the student government," and things of that nature.
And vote smart.
I know her. It was ironic. She was directly making a joke of that. When I saw it, though, given the climate at the time, I did grow concerned.
People who were involved, they were like, "Hey, there's actually a lot of negative postings on social media. They're sharing your picture and the cover photo with your caption. It's turning really ugly." That caption was reposted and retweeted over and over and over again. I knew that something big was sort of going to happen.
Pro-Israel students were taunted by pro-Hamas students after an anti-Israel vote passed on campus. Listen and watch. And right after the vote passed, a student senator posted this on Facebook. Hamas and Sharia law have taken over UC Davis, BRB crying over the resilience.
I don't have the capacity to bring Sharia law to the University of California, Davis. I don't think any of us really do have the capacity. They wanted to try to make me look as evil and violent as possible. How can we use their words out of context in such a way that their victory doesn't seem so victorious anymore?
Conveniently, like the divestment video just happened to do that. Like when we all started shouting Allahu Akbar as we were leaving, like that was really nice for us in a way because like we caught them just, doing what they're doing. And then it like went viral on YouTube.
Anger and tension running high at the University of California Davis campus. What you just saw played out late last week as the Student Government Association voted on a resolution to boycott the Jewish state of Israel.
They kept showing it over and over again. And then they just said that the Muslim students forced the pro-Israel students to leave the room.
Reports say when the Israel supporters tried to object to this vote, the pro-Palestinian students you just saw tried to shout them down with cries of Allahu Akbar.
I invite you now to stand up. Really, stand up. And join me in walking out of the room.
Of course, we know that they left willingly, and they stated that they were going to walk out of the room.
It's incredible to hear Allahu Akbar shouted in the middle of this university.
And what does that represent, Megan? The subjugation of women, the torture of homosexuals, the torture of Christians, the crucifixion of Christians. That's what it has come to represent, and that's what they're shouting.
The pro-BDS activists at UC Davis then faced another crisis.
2 days after a resolution passed, unfortunately, someone defamed the Jewish frat house and had painted swastikas all over it. Outrageous, just not acceptable behavior at all. What was upsetting to us, however, was they had the media there right away.
Disturbing discovery for a UC Davis student. Jewish students found swastikas painted on their fraternity house in Davis.
These swastikas were discovered that morning, and around 10 a.m., my best guess, and I believe the news media were there by 11.
Pro-Israel students say they feared recent events would lead to this.
This week has been sort of a bad week to be Jewish on campus.
After years of heated meetings, a student body passed a resolution Thursday urging UC Davis to end any affiliation with companies that support Israel.
So this is not out of the blue. We're pretty sure this is directly related.
Who were they finger pointing at but us? Us who were still on this high of finally getting this resolution passed, still in high spirits, just crushed us. Roseanne Barr tweeted, all the Jews should leave Davis and the rest of the school should be nuked. It was a crazy time. A general flooding of Islamophobia by the media. And I was dealing with like news outlets and media, and it was like the day after there was some swastikas on campus, and it was like it all blew up and became a full-time job.
Those swastikas, like who did them?
We don't even know. I think it's just some like random like white supremacist type people who just came, did it, and left. We don't think it was students.
That's pretty surprising because it was very clear from their behavior towards us and their attitudes towards us that we had done some heinous crime to them and that we deserved to pay for it.
Students who were part of the divestment movement painted swastikas on the fraternity. That's what she was hinting at. That's what she was trying to imply.
Why would we act against our interests and do that at a moment when we were, I guess, victorious? The fact that it was just so quickly tossed onto us as those who had done this, it was damaging. It was hugely damaging.
That was kind of our strategy. A lot of it was media-based, which is like kind of my interest in media. And I would say that's like 99% of what it means to be successful. That happened. Then there was another swastika. It was just like every day something new was happening, and I had to.
It was weird because they won.
Yeah.
So you think if they would win, why would they do that?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So, well, that was kind of our whole strategy. Is we knew they were going to win.
Were you in touch with the embassy, or were you in touch with like any groups?
Pretty much all of the groups. Not the embassy. I guess our consulate.
As well as the Israeli consulate in San Francisco, Julia's anti-BDS campaign had the guidance of several pro-Israel lobby groups.
Stand With Us helped us a little bit in terms of actual research on the speech. They gave us some like legal research type stuff. I'm always biased and want to work with AIPAC, so they kind of helped for like moral support. And David Project helped us a little bit. It was more help like gaining contacts in like the media world. I guess we needed money to pay for somebody to film the speech. Like we had a Davis Faculty for Israel group, and like they were hugely helpful to us. They would, you know, because some of them were retired lawyers, so they'd write legal documents for us. They knew the administration, they were tenured, they had pull.
Despite the passing of the BDS motion, the governors of the university known as regents are under no obligation to abide by the students' vote.
As for that resolution to boycott Israel, well, UC Regents issued a statement saying they will not even entertain the idea.
After looking back on everything, I feel a little creepy because of what happened after the vote. People that were affiliated with the group just were smeared and had to deal with these very personal crises of the world calling us terrorists and the world thinking that we were this spiteful hate group. It's pretty unequivocal how organized they were, how brutal and ruthless that narrative was, and how it affected us in the end.
Back in Washington, our undercover reporter was attending the annual conference of the Israeli-American Council. The IAC's role is to connect American Jews to Israel. This year, combating BDS was top of the agenda.
I think we need to worry. The polling isn't good, and all of you probably know it. If you look at the polls, the younger you get on the demographic scales, the lower support for Israel is. It seems to be achieving its goals, and I think it threatens future American support for Israel. Younger people are leaving college less sympathetic to Israel than when they entered.
The lobby hope that a new partnership with Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs will become a game changer in the fight against BDS.
For years, we are trying to defeat the BDS and the delegitimization movement. We are all on the defensive, and I think we should move to the offensive. Using especially cyber and internet tools to try and defeat this ugly movement. I'm really honored to present my partners here, Brigadier General Sima Vakandil, the Director General of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. Sima, please.
The fact that the Israeli government decided to be a key player means a lot, because we can bring themes that usually are not existing in NGOs or civilian entities that are now enrolled in this theme. The Israeli government can look at the bigger picture and actually create this coordination and cooperation. We are the only player inside the pro-Israeli network who can actually say that he's filling the gaps.
The Israeli official described to members of the lobby the first phase of the covert war.
Ambiguity is part of our guidelines. That's why I'm not going to say anything too much about each one of the legs. The first one is intel, intelligence, or data, or information. What we've done is mapped and analyzed the whole phenomena globally, not just the United States, not just campuses, but campuses and intersectionality and labor unions and churches.
We started to establish a project called Israel Cyber Shield. This project is actually a civil intelligence unit that collects, analyzes, and acts upon the activists in the BDS movement, if it's people, organizations, or events. And we give everything we collect. We are using the most sophisticated data system, intelligence system in the Israeli market.
Let's take the defense activity that we're doing and make it into proactivity and offensivity.
Israel has used cyber sabotage. We suffered from intense denial of service attacks, hacking attacks on our websites. Israel decided to go on cyber warfare against BDS publicly. They said, we shall spy on BDS individuals and networks, especially in the West. We have not heard a peep from any Western government complaining that Israel is admitting that it will spy on your citizens. Imagine Iran saying it will spy on British or American citizens. Just imagine what could happen.
The Ministry of Strategic Affairs brings together this group called the Global Coalition for Israel. And it's like leading pro-Israel advocacy groups around the world. My view and the view of Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs, which we coordinate with sometimes, we communicate with sometimes, is like Europe is lost and it's basically over. And like they're turning a lot of attention out of the US because they feel we're on your path.
Can I join these? I'd love to. I don't know if you'd let me. But
it's like a pretty sensitive conversation, but it's going well.
If China was doing this, if Iran was doing it, if Russia was doing it, there would be uproar. You would have Congress going after them, you would have hearings, you would have prosecutions. The question is, how does Israel get away with this?
It's modeled on General Stanley McChrystal's counterinsurgency strategy in Iraq. We've copied a lot from that strategy that has been working really well for us, actually. And one of the pieces is this operations and intelligence brief. We're using social media intelligence, a tool called Radian 6. We're phasing that out over the next year, and we're bringing on more sophisticated technology that was developed in Israel.
An American should not be spied on by a foreign government that is able to access all this information and possibly undermine their ability to exercise their democratic rights in this country. So we're not dealing with amateurs. This is not an amateur work. We're dealing with a government that have a ministry at a ministerial level engaged in the systematic targeting of activists outside of its sovereign borders.
The only way it's going to stop is if
somebody in the government points out this is illegal and we're not going to tolerate it. And if we do tolerate it, other countries are going to do it as well.
There's a company called Census, S-E-N-S-U-S. It's like very pricey though, We had to raise like hundreds of thousands of dollars just for it. It's going to increase our discovery rate. We're discovering just about everything we need. It's also going to bring new sources online that we weren't able to access in an automated fashion, like message boards. And we have ways to crawl message boards right now and to monitor them, but it's like disconnected from the event and activity discovery mechanism, so that we want that system to be all integrated. So we just signed the contract yesterday for them to start that work. They actually already started it. Good friends in Israel that are helping us with that.
You would think that since the United States has this special relationship with Israel and gives it so much largesse and protects it diplomatically at every turn and gives this assistance unconditionally, that the Israelis would do less spying here than other countries do. But on the contrary, what we see is that the Israelis are probably at the top of the list when it comes to foreign countries spying inside the United States.
Our investigation into Israel's covert war against BDS led Tony back to Julia Rifkind. She's American, and her full-time job at the Israeli embassy is monitoring BDS. She summed up a typical day at the office.
Gathering intel, reporting back to Israel. That's a lot of what I do. Is report back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Strategic Affairs, and make sure they have the right information. It's in Knesset of what's going on here. So that's why I do a lot of reporting. I talk to people from tons of organizations, just trying to get the information that I could to report back and kind of just talk through some of the issues with those people, see what their plan was, tell them maybe some ideas we've had, give them our support. The behind the scenes way.
Wow, it just looks like the state of Israel is employing little spies, and you can't take a breath without Israel hearing about it.
Julia spoke about her former days as a student. While at UC Davis, she was also an activist with AIPAC. The training she received from the most powerful arm of the pro-Israel lobby left its mark.
I can immediately tell when meeting with somebody where they were trying to take the way that I talk about stuff, obviously I'm an AIPAC training camp, activist, the way they call it. So I can tell when somebody's on stand with us, or David Project, or ICC, or Hospital, Camera, ZOA, I kind of tell.
She's been trained really well. She follows the commands that she has been given by these Israeli organizations, and she follows it really well.
I pretty much, all of my friends work at AIPAC, all of them. So whenever we have events at the embassy, and there's oh, we should invite AIPAC people, it's a joke that obviously I'm gonna be the one to write all the emails down. So whenever they're we have to submit names of lists for events, mine's 15 names and 14 of them are AIPAC.
AIPAC encourages the students it trains to conceal any affiliation.
When you're lobbying on behalf of AIPAC, you don't say AIPAC. You say I'm a pro-Israel student from UC Davis. And when you're meeting with students on campus, I would never say I am the AIPAC campus rep. I say my name's Julia, I'm a pro-Israel student. You don't need the title, you don't need the organization.
AIPAC's involvement in student council elections is also kept secret.
AIPAC attracts the more political students who are more interested in lobbying. We had campaigns and stuff like that. We dealt with student elections, very behind the scenes.
They actually were found to have put cameras in the rooms where there were meetings going on. I liked meeting outside where there are no rooms and there are no possible cameras under the chairs or wherever they may have put them.
I have several weird Facebooks. I have my fake Facebook that I follow all the SJP accounts. I have some fake name. My name is Jay Bernard or something. So it just sounds like an old white guy, which is the plan. I joined all these groups. A lot of people haven't added me. I mainly just wanted to see on the newsfeed what kind of articles they were sharing, just to kind of see what their internal dialogue was.
Every single event that I put on, you would have these pro-Israel groups coming out before our guests even got there with their cameras, videotaping.
Julia has no contact with her handlers in Israel. She writes her intelligence briefs and awaits their instructions.
I write a report that I give to my boss, who translates it. 'Cause it's really weird. We don't like talk to them on the phone or like email or whatever. There's like a special like server that's like really secure that I don't have access to because I'm an American. You have to have like clearance to access the server. It's called cables. It's not even sitting in Hebrew. It's like literally cables. I've seen it. It looks really bizarre. So I write reports that my boss translates into the cables and sends them, and then they'll send something back, and he'll translate it and tell me what I need to do.
If she believes it's spying on activists to suppress a free speech movement, then, you know, peace be to her. And I hope she feels good sleeping at night being on that side of things. We're a group of student activists advocating for Palestinian human rights. And to think that we're so upsetting and threatening to a state is pretty awe-striking to me. Creepy, but also, I guess, makes me more proud of the work I did.
It's nice kind of seeing what they're talking about.
What do they say?
They don't talk about like our side at all, which is disappointing, so it'd be like nice to do the drama, but it's mainly them sharing their like videos, their like AJ Plus videos on Al Jazeera.
What do you think about Al Jazeera?
It sucks because they have a lot of interesting like liberal videos, which I'm like, wow, like that's amazing to hear about that human rights issue, and about that like sexism situation, or whatever. And they'll show like why Israel is an apartheid state, and you're like, like not anymore. So that's what's annoying, is that it gets, you know, tied to all those causes. It's hard to be liberal.
You represent that government.
Yeah, I can't say anything negative about Bibi or like the government because I technically work for them. Not directly. I'm just a normal American.
In episode 2, Tony discovers how the lobby raises funds for congressmen.
Basically, they hand him an envelope with 20 credit card numbers. For all the legal reasons, it's just people pool their money.
Handing over $250,000. That buys a lawmaker.
And how a row over anti-Semitism swept through the University of Tennessee.
You have to show that they're racist hate groups and to consistently portray them that way.
Previously on the Lobby USA, spying on American students, a worker at the Israeli embassy describes her remit to our undercover reporter.
Everything's gathering intel and reporting back to Israel. That's a lot of what I do. It's report back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Strategic Affairs.
It's part of a covert campaign to influence America's youth.
We have 3 different sub-campaigns: data gathering, working on activist organization, money trail.
Wow, it just looks like the state of Israel is employing little spies.
In the second of a 4-part series, how the pro-Israel lobby influences Congress. And as our undercover reporter gains greater trust, he is offered an extraordinary assignment. Using an undercover reporter, Al Jazeera's investigative unit infiltrates one of the most powerful lobbies in the world.
Getting $38 billion in security aid to Israel matters, which is what AIPAC is doing.
We examine how the lobby, led by AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, has secured unwavering support in Congress.
Congressmen don't do anything unless you pressure them. And the only way to do that is with money.
What the lobby is all about is to make sure that Israel gets special treatment from the United States forever.
But after occupying Palestinian lands for half a century, the pro-Israel lobby is facing a new challenge.
We called for a full boycott of Israel, divesting from it, and eventually imposing sanctions on it to achieve UN-stipulated rights of the Palestinian people.
A movement to boycott, divest, and impose sanctions on Israel, BDS, was formed on American campuses.
It seems to be achieving its goals. It threatens future American support for Israel.
We believe in justice for all people. So that means the occupation has to end.
Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs responded with a covert operation to defeat BDS.
אתה צריך לעשות את זה עם הרבה מאוד עמימות. זה לא גוף צבאי היררכי שאם הרגנו את X, אז כל הגוף מתחתיו לא פועל.
So the Israeli government leverages Jewish organizations in the diaspora. Absolutely.
It's a psychological campaign involving spying and smears.
You discredit the messenger as a way of discrediting the message.
Just stay on message. And what is that message? BDS is a hate movement.
While our reporter monitored pro-Israel groups, he was asked to go undercover for the lobby.
You're going into enemy territory. It's not for everybody.
In Washington, Tony often socialized with younger members of the pro-Israel lobby. Here, the discussions are focused on influencing elites. Recent graduates appear to no longer care about debates they had at university.
We try and go through student government and pass bills. I mean, you know, looking back on it now, it's all it's total crap. BDS in general, obviously. But also, it's just, I don't know, it doesn't do anything. I mean, fighting back against it has no practical effect. What has a practical effect is getting Congress to give Israel military aid. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what happens at the University of X. What matters is what happens here. What matters is what happens in the capitals of the state, the capitals of other countries.
The pro-Israel lobby is keen to co-opt elites beyond America. At a party organized by AIPAC, Tony met an intern at a public relations firm whose clients include the United Arab Emirates. The lobby apparently has allies in the Arab world.
The American Jewish Committee is running a study tour to, it's either Dubai or Abu Dhabi, and they're talking about mutual cooperation.
What are the ties like between the UAE and Israel?
They're getting so much better. Nobody knows it. The governments have to coordinate on security. It's all under the table. They're on trade, security, tech, medicine. There's a lot of cooperation. Basically where I see it standing right now is the GCC has all this under the table cooperation with Israel, and it's getting to the point where it's getting to the surface.
Does the UAE have a stake in BDS?
They do run all the time the argument of Palestinian suffering and occupation. They do kind of toe that line, but that's because they have to save face in the Arab League. They're literally just trying to cover their bases.
Are they actually helping out BDS in any way?
They benefit from Israeli tech, so they're not going to boycott that. Why would they?
Tony's boss at the Israel Project used to work at AIPAC, where debate about Israel's actions or Palestinian rights were rarely prominent.
Does the war of ideas matter? I don't know. I know that like getting $38 billion in security aid to Israel matters, which is what AIPAC just did. That's what I'm proud to have been a part of for so long. My job was basically to convince students that participating in the war of ideas on campus is actually a distraction. You can hold up signs and have rallies on campus, but the Congress gets $3.1 billion a year for Israel.
Everything AIPAC does is focused on influencing Congress. Congress is where you have leverage, so you can't influence the President of the United States directly, but the Congress can.
AIPAC is very interested in making sure that every representative and every senator toes the line on Israel. And it is highly effective in that regard. That's why it's considered to be synonymous in many people's heads with the lobby.
AIPAC's website shows members of Congress attending its conferences and declaring their support for Israel.
And on behalf of Congress, thank you for sending a clear and unequivocal message to the world that the United States stands with Israel now, tomorrow, and always.
I reject the BDS movement, whether it be on campuses in France and London or right here in the United States of America.
To get elected in the American political system, you need lots of money. What AIPAC does is it makes sure that money is funneled your way if you're seen as pro-Israel, and it'll go to significant lengths to make sure that you stay in office if you continue to be staunchly pro-Israel.
May God bless Israel. May God bless the United States of America. May God bless you all. Thank you so much. Thank you.
They have questionnaires. Anybody running for Congress is expected to fill out a questionnaire. And they evaluate the depth of your commitment to Israel on the basis of that questionnaire. Then you have an interview with local people. If you get AIPAC support, then more often than not, you're going to win.
Jim Moran is a Democrat who represented a congressional district in Northern Virginia.
You realize it's not just the money, it's the number of concerned activists. They'll send out postcards, they'll make phone calls, they'll organize. I mean, that's the democratic process. They understand the democratic process.
We made sure that there were people in every single congressional district. And then you'd call them up and say, I'm calling from AIPAC in Washington. I did these calls. We hear that you're good friends with Congressman so-and-so. Oh my God, yes. We've been friends since elementary school. Well, what does he think about Israel? I never talked to him about Israel. Well, can I come down and talk to you and help you figure out a way to talk to him about Israel? No, just tell me. What should I say? I don't have to, I'll just tell him.
Our undercover reporter wanted to learn more about how funding is secured for congressmen.
Speaking of the devil.
David Oakes, a prominent pro-Israel advocate, invited Tony to a fundraising event. Oakes later called him to discuss the details.
Is it just a social event?
No, hold on. I'm going to email you a list of the people that this group supports. This is the biggest ad hoc political group, and definitely the wealthiest in D.C. Hold on. Mark Kirk, the senator from Illinois. Ted Deutsch from Florida. Barbara Comstock, she's the congressman from Virginia. Richard Byrd from Carolina. Kelly Ayotte, she's fantastic. She's in the Arms Committee. They'll walk in the room and they'll say everything here is off the record. And then they'll say, here's a little bit about me, and then people will ask very specific questions.
The fundraiser was being held in a wealthy suburb of Washington.
The AIPAC group, it makes a difference. It really, really does. It's the best bang for your buck, and the networking is phenomenal. Congressmen and senators don't do anything unless you pressure them. They kick the can down the road unless you pressure them. And the only way to do that is with money.
Right now, our current contribution limit from any person to a candidate is $2,700. Now, that's a lot of money, you know, and that can certainly buy some gratitude with the lawmaker. But if you really want to add punch to that type of buying of favors, what you do is you get 50 or 100 people together at an event like this, all chipping in $2,700, and then you bundle it all together and hand over the total amount to the lawmaker. At that point, we're talking anywhere up to $250,000. So suddenly you've got a group of people with the same demand they want from the lawmaker, handing over $250,000. That buys a lawmaker.
The fundraiser was for Anthony Brown, who ran for Congress in November 2016.
This is direct spending. Brown's going to use that 30 grand to do ad campaigns. So they strategically pick the ones who are in the close reaches that they want to build relationships with. So we want the Jewish community to go face to face in a small environment, 50, 30, 40 people, and say, this is what's important to us. We wanted to make sure if we give you money that you're going to enforce the Iran deal. That way, when they need something from him or her, like the Iran deal, they can quickly mobilize and say, look, we'll give you 30 grand. They actually impact it.
He's actually saying we're buying these office holders. And that's the point. We're chipping in all this money so we can hand over $100,000 or $200,000 to the office holders so we can buy them.
You're not supposed to advertise. There's all these advertising laws. I was surprised they had an invite. I've never seen an actual invite before.
Oakes described a similar event he attended in New York, which included donors from Wall Street.
In New York, with Jeff Talbot, we don't ask a goddamn thing about the Palestinians. You know why? Because it's a tiny issue, that's why. It's a small, insignificant issue. The big issue is Iran. We want everything focused on Iran. What happens is Jeff meets with the congressman in the back room, tells them exactly what his goals are. And by the way, Jeff Talpin is worth $250 million. Basically, they hand him an envelope with 20 credit cards and say, you can swipe each of these credit cards for $1,000 each.
There is a disclosure law that is designed to highlight whether there may be potential money laundering going on in events like this. And that is if the funds are earmarked. And that means the organization has to disclose who showed up at that event and how much each individual chipped in and what they handed over to the lawmaker.
What's the name of the group that puts this on?
It doesn't have a name. There's no name. It's an ad hoc political group. For all the legal reasons, people pool their money.
What this specific group is doing to try to avoid that disclosure requirement, it isn't taking money and then putting it in its own account and then handing it over to the office holder. It's just collecting credit card information and then turning that over directly to the candidate. Therefore, it's not violating the earmarking law, and they're not reporting this. All we would see on the campaign finance reports are the individuals who contributed, but there'd be no record on those campaign finance reports that they worked together as a bundling group, that they were all at this event. All we'd know is person A gave $2,700, person B gave $2,700, and we'd have no idea they're working in tandem with each other.
The one in New York is 10 grand over 2 cycles. It's a minimum commitment. Some people give a lot more than that. Whatever your commitment is. So like if you give 5,000, Jeff will ensure that I don't go over the 2,600. You know what I'm saying?
If one is at a meeting where person A wants to give 5,000, another person has only $100 to give, and that person gave $2,500 to the other person at that meeting as a gift, and they both therefore gave a total of 5,000, 5,100, would that be illegal?
That would be illegal. That would be laundering of campaign contributions. The limit applies to the individual. And so each individual is subject to that $2,700 limit. And if any individual goes over that limit, they are violating the contribution limit. They cannot legally do that by laundering money through other individuals.
If you give 5,000, Jeff will ensure that I don't go over the 2,600. You know what I'm saying?
During a cab journey across Washington, Tony's boss at the Israel Project, Eric, spoke about his former job as a fundraiser for Jeb Bush.
I was one of the first employees of the Bush campaign. The first time Trump came up in a conversation was, we were going to solicit him for Jeb. And we're like, why isn't he writing a check? We would joke, like, this is the donor who went nuts.
Eric shares his concerns about Jeb Bush's campaign.
I hope the Justice Department doesn't make an example out of Bush, because we were operating in a real gray zone. And we raised enough money, we figured, let them come at us, we'll defend ourselves. We thought he's going to be the Republican nominee, everyone did at that stage.
A relatively small number of families supply hundreds of millions of dollars annually to lobby politicians.
The 200 families whose giving constitutes 90% of all political giving are not giving because they want a government contract or because it's good for their business. They're doing it because they actually care. In my view, it's obscene how much money there is.
One of the most effective uses of the lobby's funds occurs when Congress is on its break.
Every year, they fly hundreds of members of Congress to Israel for these extended travel junkets that are really lavish. They're first-rate vacations. They'll rack up $20,000 or more for a vacation for a member of Congress. The member can bring along their spouse, and they have a great time.
You are told that Israel continues to be under siege from hundreds of millions of its neighbors who are Muslim and who hate Israel, who hate Jewish people. You're told that Israel survives because of the United States and because of American politicians like you who support us.
An attempt was made to change the law so that all expenses-paid trips would be considered a bribe.
I drafted legislation to try to reform the whole profession of lobbying to get rid of free travel and gifts from lobbyists. The Honest Leadership and Open Government Act of 2007 significantly enhanced the travel restrictions that if you're an organization that employs a lobbyist, you can only provide a one-day trip for a member of Congress.
Then AIPAC exerted its influence.
There was a major loophole written into the travel restriction that was essentially engineered by AIPAC, and this loophole is widely known as the AIPAC loophole.
The clause excluded educational trips organized by a charity that didn't hire lobbyists. AIPAC happened to be affiliated to such a charity.
It doesn't have an office, it doesn't have any employees, it's just a tax form that they filed. Gifts of dinner, gifts of wonderful resorts to stay at, gifts of entertainment, all of which is packed up into one of these trips, is a very, very effective tool at influence peddling.
Most of our donors were like nudniks, like schleppers. The quality is starting to improve. We're attracting more impressive people. Until recently, the people we're attracting, is the guy, he's wealthy, gives away $25,000 a year, $10,000 is to us, and this is his hobby and full-time job, and he won't shut the up or stop calling. We're finally starting to expand into the class of donors that AIPAC has, which is like the more elite, easier to work with, smart, strategic, writing big checks kind of money. It takes just as much time to get a $10,000 check from someone as it does getting $500,000.
The money raised by AIPAC doesn't just fund congressmen who support their goals.
If you wander off the reservation and you become critical of Israel, you not only will not get money, AIPAC will go to great lengths to find somebody to run against you and support that person very generously. And the end result is you're likely to lose your seat in Congress.
They threaten. They immediately threaten. Even if they know that AIPAC can't defeat them, AIPAC can make their lives more difficult. They can make sure that their next town meeting or something, some members of the Jewish congregation jump up and say, but you're anti-Israel.
In 2002, AIPAC was lobbying Moran to vote for the invasion of Iraq.
The executive director of AIPAC said that his most important accomplishment was securing the authorization for the use of U.S. military force in Iraq. AIPAC was pushing it very hard.
Why does AIPAC benefit from the United States going to war?
The United States getting involved in wars in the Middle East is ultimately in Israel's interests, because we have a stake in the region.
Congressman Moran refused to vote for the invasion, as AIPAC requested.
There are compelling, fundamental reasons why this body should oppose this resolution.
Then at a public meeting, he was asked a question.
A Jewish woman actually stood up in a town hall. She said, why aren't more Jews involved in the marches against the war? I said, if the leaders of the Jewish community were opposed to the war, I think that would make a difference.
The lobby reacted, claiming this was evidence of Moran's belief in a Jewish conspiracy that was leading America to war.
There was a conservative rabbi in my district who was assigned to me, I assume, by AIPAC. And he had warned me that if I voiced my views about the Israeli lobby, that my career would be over, and implied that it would be done through the Post. And sure enough, the Washington Post editorialized brutally. Everybody ganged up.
So what are the main outlets that TIP work with?
Washington Post is the biggest one.
Okay. Isn't that like just down there or something?
Yeah, it's actually that building.
Moran claims the Washington Post's editorial board has a close relationship with AIPAC.
The principal editorial board of the Post itself has been a very effective instrument because they've been able to maintain their credibility. And it's a great paper in every other way, but because they have such credibility, they're extremely effective.
Everyone knew he wasn't anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism has come to mean anti-Israel. The AIPAC crowd doesn't really care very much about whether or not a person likes Jews or wants one to move next door. All they care about is what their position is on Israel.
Both of my daughters married Jewish men. My grandchildren are Jewish. Anybody that considers me anti-Semite is ignorant.
In part two, a battle over the definition of anti-Semitism on America's campuses.
There are those who claim, oh yeah, we're trying to stop anti-Semitism, but what they're actually trying to do is stop advocacy for Palestinian human rights.
In part one, our undercover reporter discovered that many young people in the pro-Israel lobby have given up debating the BDS movement on campus.
We try and go through student government and pass bills. I mean, you know, looking back on it now, it's all it's total crap. Fighting back against it has no practical effect. What has a practical effect is getting Congress to give Israel military aid.
Tony was attending a party run by an advocacy group that he'd joined. A journalist then approached him with an extraordinary proposition. He wanted Tony to work undercover for the lobby at a meeting of BDS activists.
For the Allgemeiner, we're trying to recruit someone to go undercover just to go there and just see what's going on. And I think the person would get paid for it too.
Yeah.
Someone's gonna sign up, do that profile, just kind of like see what's going on. Higher up, you know, they sent me an email today that like, you know anyone who could do this. For some reason, you popped into my head.
A few days later, a journalist from the Allgemeiner contacted Tony.
It would be undercover and have to be kept pretty quiet. We would like to have some recording device on your person. Any level of potential danger or, you know, difficulty, violence or verbal assault, none of that concerns you or puts you off?
No, because I think I'm pretty good at just being kind of zen in the face of verbal assaults.
The Allgemeiner claims to be the fastest growing Jewish newspaper in America. It pays particular attention to events on college campuses.
We're working on a project now about ranking U.S. universities and colleges in terms of their anti-Semitic and anti-Israel activity. We have a campus bureau that monitors this sort of behavior and these incidents and these campaigns all day long, all week long.
The Allgemeine often reports that anti-Semitism exists amongst pro-Palestinian student groups.
The language that comes from those arenas move into that sphere of the new anti-Semitism, which is anti-Israelism. And that's a big focus at the Campus Bureau, looking at the blurring of those lines and where those boundaries have eroded. As journalists, right, exposure is the goal, exposing truth.
In August 2016, a story in the Allgemeine caused waves in Washington's pro-Israel circles.
The thing that I'm working on, you might have seen the news recently about a cesspool of anti-Semitism at the University of Tennessee. So the expose was on these anti-Semitic tweets. They uncovered 14 current students, 5 recent graduates at the University of Tennessee that had tweeted all of these horribly anti-Semitic things.
The evidence was released by an anonymous group within the pro-Israel lobby.
They're called Canary Mission. Nobody really knows who they are.
Yeah.
They expose anti-Semitism, anti-Israelism, and anti-Americanism in the U.S., like on college campuses. They study it and then release these expose reports, but they're secretive. They don't reveal who they are.
The University of Tennessee is based in Knoxville, a quiet city in the east of the state. Tennessee is conservative and religious. The Christian church has political influence here. 6 out of 10 voters opted for Donald Trump. At the university, students and professors, including opponents of BDS, were taken aback by the headlines.
It said that there was rampant anti-Semitism at the University of Tennessee. This was quite a shock. It was very surreal and strange. I didn't see anything happening on the ground. It all seemed to be internet-based.
There's this international headline with our names and this defamation of our characters. It was the last thing that we were expecting to happen.
I was surprised that they were targeting the University of Tennessee. I mean, there's just not a whole lot going on in Knoxville. It just seems such a benign target.
Several tweets were clear-cut examples of anti-Semitism. Some failed to distinguish between Jewish people and the State of Israel. Others made vile references to the horrors of the Holocaust.
There were definitely some very anti-Semitic things said, but it seemed to be by a limited number of students.
Those tweets are horrible, and that should not be supported by anybody.
One of the students, there were tweets from when they were 14, 15, and 16 years old. People do and say stupid things.
Students who were campaigning for Palestinian equal rights were immediately suspicious, believing the Allgemeine had another motive in running the headline.
The way that I saw that article was that to discredit some of the work that we were doing, they threw in these people who are a part of the Muslim community or a part of the Arab community around Knoxville, and things that they had said, things that they had done.
They were very old, a lot of times before people had gotten to college. I think this is just old stuff that's being dug up for lack of any other material.
I was really horrified that you had essentially this blacklist of students.
The list included Summer Awad, a Palestinian American. She was accused of supporting terrorism after sharing a Facebook post.
In that image, I mean, all it is showing different tools of Palestinian resistance. One of them's BDS, one of them's stones, and the one that they circled happens to be the knife. They obviously have much bigger weapons than the Palestinians can even imagine having, but they're just able to frame this image of violence and to frame this image of defending themselves.
Shortly after being named by Canary Mission, posters and flyers linked BDS supporters to Hamas.
There was a list of most of the names of the students that were mentioned in the Canary Mission. All I kept seeing were flyers all over the place. Like, they'll put it on cars, they'll put it on side tables in the student centers and stuff like that.
That kind of scared me, to think that there are actually people physically on campus posting these things.
Back in Washington, Aviva is drafting a letter to the University of Tennessee on behalf of the Brandeis Center. They want the university to take a stand.
We're telling them that basically they need to issue a stronger statement. They need to investigate the students that were involved. They need to offer education and training.
In addition to drawing attention to those responsible for anti-Semitic tweets, their orchestrated release served another purpose. It's part of a wider campaign by the pro-Israel lobby.
The problem right now, I think, on universities is that administrations don't realize that anti-Israel statements or anti-Zionist statements often are also anti-Semitic.
To find out what anti-Semitism means for the lobby, Tony visits Aviva's boss at the Brandeis Center for Human Rights in Washington. Despite its name, it's a pro-Israel lobby group.
Hi. It's great to finally meet you. Really good to meet you.
Kenneth Marcus is involved in the lobby's attempt to redefine anti-Semitism in a way that could include criticism of the state of Israel.
Right now, the challenge is that there are people who say, you know what, anti-Israel politics have nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Well, you've got to show that they're not the same, but they're not entirely different either. The goal is to have the federal government to establish a definition of anti-Semitism that is parallel to the State Department definition.
The US State Department defines anti-Semitism using a three-point test known as the 3 Ds. It includes statements that demonize Israel, those that apply double standards, or those that delegitimize the state.
There have been attempts by some to try to define anti-Semitism in such a way that conflates actual anti-Semitism with completely legitimate criticism of Israel or Israeli government policies. They are overly broad and vague to the point where any kind of criticism of Israel or of Israeli government policies can be labeled as anti-Semitic.
One of the major tactics that the lobby uses to defend Israel, and it's done this for a long period of time, but it's using it more and more these days, is to identify people who criticize Israel as an anti-Semite.
The letter that Aviva was sending called for the University of Tennessee, Knoxville to address a long-standing problem of anti-Semitism on campus. The Brandeis Center is urging American universities to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism that could include criticism of Israel.
We are trying to get universities to adopt a uniform definition, whether it's the State Department's definition or a similar version of it, because then we think that the administrators would be able to understand anti-Semitism better and discipline students for hateful and discriminatory actions.
The Brandeis Center also wanted the university to screen what they described as a path-breaking film called Unmasked Judeophobia. It was made by a member of staff at the university and featured Kenneth Marcus.
It is now socially acceptable to say lots of different things that were not acceptable in the past. Anti-Israelism and anti-Semitism is one example.
It tries to make the claim that Muslims have adopted Nazi-like anti-Semitism and are going to essentially lead the next Holocaust on the Jews.
The film positions anti-Semitism at the heart of the BDS movement.
It was not sponsored by the chancellor, but it was held at the law school, and Ken Marcus did attend.
It was screened on the day that commemorates victims of the Holocaust.
The film was not appropriate for Holocaust Remembrance Day. As a scholar of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, I would just say the film's conclusions didn't meet scholarly standards.
Exactly why Washington's pro-Israel lobby is concerned by events in Tennessee is at first hard to understand, until one considers the growth of evangelical Christianity in the southern states.
Tennessee is a Bible Belt state, and the capital of Tennessee is known as the buckle of the Bible Belt. And that good old Southern Christian culture is very strong here, and a big part of that has now become this rhetoric of Christian Zionism.
Satan hates Israel and the Jews because Israel's restoration initiated the last days of Bible prophecy.
Christian Zionists believe that for the end of times to come, for Christ to return, it's necessary for Israel to control all of what was historically considered to be Israeli territory.
Based on prophecy, Jesus Christ could never return for the church to resurrect the dead in Christ until Jerusalem was first in the hands of Israel and the capital of Israel.
Christian Zionists and Christian organizations that lobby on behalf of the Israeli government, a lot of them have a theology which I think is in many ways anti-Semitic.
The Jews have to leave the West. It says in your Bible, God will bring them back to Israel from the West.
It instrumentalizes Jews in such a way that their goal is that all Jews around the world will leave where they live and move to Israel, because in their theology, that is what will lead to the coming of the Messiah again, and then all of the Jews will convert or will all be killed.
Leaders of the Christian Zionist lobby threw their weight behind the Trump election campaign.
I have been asked 101 times plus, why do you think Donald Trump won? And I have an immediate answer: because he was the only one that was blessing Israel. The evangelicals flooded the voting booths this time like at no time in our history.
And a lot of the laws that are being enacted in those states that are pro-Israel, anti-BDS, are coming about in part because there is so much sympathy for Israel in that community, which has a lot of political power.
Senate Joint Resolution 170, bipartisan resolution to condemn boycott, disinvestment, sanctions movement, and increasing incidence of anti-Semitism.
In 2015, Tennessee became the first state legislature to condemn BDS. It's the result of the lobby's attempt to use legal means to quell BDS on campus.
In recent light of anti-Semitic things that have happened here in Tennessee on our college campuses, we are just expressing our support as an ally for the state of Israel. And with that, I renew my motion.
Made it seem as though there's this huge Palestinian liberation movement happening in this state. That's the way that it was presented at the legislature, was that we need to stop this before it takes over our state.
There's an intensive effort by Israel and pro-Israel groups to get governments, universities, legislative bodies to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism that includes criticism of Israel and its state ideology, Zionism.
We're the space where a lot of these things are initially brought and tested. The rough drafts, like the beta version, comes here, and then you'll see that same bill go into another legislature the following year.
According to their definition, if I say to you that I believe that instead of separate Israeli and Palestinian states, there should be a single state where Jews, Christians, Muslims, atheists, everyone has full equal rights, the way they do under the Constitution of the United States, that would make me an anti-Semite because I'm denying Israel's right to be a Jewish state.
How to define anti-Semitism? I would say hatred, discrimination, violence, animus towards Jews for being Jewish, I would say is the broadest definition of anti-Semitism.
They have created this perverse definition of anti-Semitism where calling for everyone in Palestine, Israel to have equal rights is somehow an attack on Jews. And they're trying to get this pushed into official definitions. And this has been a key goal of people like Kenneth Marcus and the Brandeis Center, so that they can then go after people who are advocating for equality and bring them up on charges that they're actually anti-Semitic bigots.
You have to show that they're racist hate groups, and that they are using intimidation to get funded, and to consistently portray them that way.
6 months after the Allgemeine ran its report, an anti-Semitism awareness bill was brought before Tennessee's State Assembly. The bill incorporates the 3Ds definition, which can include criticism of Israel. Kenneth Marcus gave evidence.
When I had read a newspaper article in a major national Jewish newspaper indicating some issues, we independently verified several different issues going on with blogging, I think it was Facebook entries, Nazi-type references to Jews, and the need to kill Jews. They may have dealt with that, but it seems to me it's an indication that the problem is here.
In order to create enough sort of political momentum and hysteria to get these bills through, you need to show that anti-Semitism is rife on campuses. You see groups like the Brandeis Center jumping on headlines which are very dramatic and very scary. Incidents like the one that they claimed happened at the University of Tennessee are certainly helpful in a political sense if you're trying to push legislation like that through.
A right to exist.
Aviva Vogelstein also traveled to Tennessee.
If a student on a campus says, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, meaning that from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, there will be no state of Israel, that would be considered anti-Semitic. Another example would be when students on campus chant things like, Intifada, Intifada, we support the Intifada. That's calling for, an Intifada is calling for violence against innocent Israeli civilians. And that is an incitement to violence. And it's calling for demonization and delegitimization of Israel.
7 months earlier, when Aviva was writing the letter to the University of Tennessee, she was talking to a leader of the Jewish community in Knoxville. It seems that she told Aviva that the University of Tennessee doesn't have a long-standing problem of anti-Semitism.
She's like, I've been on campus for 10 years, and there have been no, actual incidents of anti-Semitism. These tweets are obviously disgusting and need to be addressed. It's very misleading that they're calling this a cesspool of anti-Semitism.
Jewish students at the University of Tennessee repeated this sentiment before the state legislature.
When people say things like we're experiencing anti-Semitism, it hits us pretty hard. When we were told that this was being said about our university and the climate at our university, we were really confused because we had never heard about any form of anti-Semitism that was happening on our campus. So this was kind of, the first thing to come to us. So if we're the students who are supposed to have been affected by this so-called climate, you would think we would kind of know about it before.
There's no evidence that there's sort of an atmosphere of intimidation against Jewish students. Once you look behind the headlines at Tennessee, that's what everybody said.
I think it's important to highlight that any allegations that this bill is based off of, those allegations are purely external allegations, meaning they're coming from all over the country except for Tennessee.
Everybody agreed on that. The only people who didn't agree were the people coming from outside the university, Kenneth Marcus and others, who have the agenda to present the University of Tennessee and other campuses as dangerous places for Jewish students.
One of the consequences of the allegations of anti-Semitism has been to temper activism for Palestinian equal rights.
You can look at this campus in the last 8 months and see that there has been little to no activism on that forefront. I would say last year this time, we had a new sort of adrenaline underneath us, and then this kind of completely killed our fire. And it was hard to gain that momentum once again.
Remember that there's 2 steps in the lobby's game plan. The first is to put out a story that's very favorable to Israel. But the second step is to do everything possible to minimize the amount of debate there is about Israel and silence the other side as much as possible.
After Aviva spoke to Jewish students in Tennessee, she also learned that their greatest concern is unrelated to pro-Palestinian activism.
BDS is not a real movement on the campus. Students for Justice in Palestine, which has like a large following nationwide, has like very few active student members. We mostly only have problems with Christians trying to proselytize the Jewish students, because in the South it is happening. Everyone is so like, it's like all evangelical.
I find it incredibly troubling that at a time when we see a rise in real broad daylight anti-Semitism in the United States, there are those who claim, oh yeah, we're trying to stop anti-Semitism, but what they're actually trying to do is stop advocacy for Palestinian human rights.
A short time later, the Allgemeine contacted Tony once more to discuss his proposed mission to work undercover at a BDS event. The editor explained what they wanted.
One of the projects that we've been looking to do for quite a while is to try and infiltrate some of these groups, get undercover and discover what they're about from the inside. You explain the war, it's a hostile environment and there's some risk involved. The goal would really be to uncover any evidence of not just bias, but, real bigotry, the correlation between the BDS movement and hatred of Jews.
Tony is given a list of persons of interest. They're all on the Canary Mission website.
Go to canarymission.org. Have you heard of Canary Mission?
A little bit. Could you tell me about it?
People who hate it, the people who are being targeted by it, call it a blacklist. You have names here that show up on this database. Students and professors, faculty, speakers, organizations that have ties to terrorism, outright ties to terrorism, or terrorists who have called for the destruction of the Jewish state.
Despite running Canary Mission's Tennessee expose, the Allgemeine staff say Canary's identity is still a mystery.
It's an anonymous site. Nobody has any idea who's actually running this thing, and people have tried and looked into it.
If you're on board in terms of concept, then I guess the next thing we just need to figure out is the money. Can we wait for a follow-up email from you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I should get that to you within the next 24 hours.
Coming up in episode 3 of The Lobby, how anonymous websites smear pro-Palestinian activists on campus.
It was really an attempt by people who didn't know us to think, maybe I can destroy this marriage at the very least.
It's psychological warfare. Drives them crazy. They're terrified of Canary Mission.
And we reveal for the first time the people behind Canary Mission.